It may seem strange, but the areas of environmental disasters become popular tourist sites. After the release of the HBO series, there were lines of people in tour agencies in Europe who wanted to see the Chernobyl area with their own eyes. When the Pink Floyd band made its famous video about the Aral Sea, thousands of tourists rushed there to take pictures with the abandoned ships in the background. Tourism is not only about getting lazy on the beach. It is increasingly becoming about learning about our sometimes weird and sometimes cruel world. The word Basa Kelmes sounds like a password to those of us who are really concerned about the future of our planet. Today our expedition is going to the place, the name of which means going and never coming back, although we will of course do our best to return safe and sound. At present, the Aral Sea is popular generally among the fans of the severe off-road romantics. Yet, nature protection organizations are sure that spontaneous tourism can be channeled in a way beneficial for local environment. This is the last gas station on our way. From now on, we will be on our own in the 50 degrees Celsius heat. It's not the first time that the Outdoor KZ team is taking part in environmental expeditions organized by the Nomad Explorer traveler community. About the Aral Sea, we will talk to some people who are familiar with the crisis and the theme firsthand, namely Bulat Bekniyazov, Director of the Executive Directorate of the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea, Zauresh Alimbetova, Director of Basa Kelmes Nature Reserve, and Galkarbek Satekeyev, Deputy Director for Science of the same reserve. It's not only scientists who are concerned about the fate of the Aral Sea. Kazakhstan athletes, open water swimmers, also decided to contribute to promoting the Aral Sea as a new tourist brand. They intend to cross the Aral Sea from the eastern to the western coast. The Aral Sea is fed by two great Central Asian rivers, the Amudarya and Sirdarya, originating in the glaciers of the Pamir and Central Tian Shan. Reaching the plain, the mountain streams restrain their violent temper and turn into the quiet Sirdarya. In its midstream, the river banks are overgrown with Tugay woods, where even tigers had lived not that long ago. We are wandering along the Sirdarya coast looking for the grave of Korkut Ata, a legendary Turkic musician and philosopher. Since his youth, Korkut was trying to solve the great mystery of existence. He visited many countries, but everywhere he went, be it the world of nature or the human world, he saw aging and death. When the time comes, all matter turns into dust, and only the deeds of people remain until the next generations remember them. These deeds may be different, creating the Korbez or destroying a whole sea.
Қазір мен Сырдария өзенінің бойындамын. Қуанышым шексіз, өйткені
I am now on the bank of the Sirdarya River, where Korkut Ata, a great representative of the Kazakh people who invented the Korbez, is buried. People have been living along the Sirdarya River since high antiquity. They built cities, cultivated fields, moderately used water resources, but crossed the red line separating reasonable water use from environmental disaster only in the middle of the last century. In the course of the last 80 years, the area of irrigated land in Central Asia and the consequent volume of the water used has increased 60 times. I read somewhere that earlier in the spring high water, the Sirdarya would flood the area along its coast for dozens of kilometers. I'm now standing on this cliff, and the water is about 5 meters away from me. In 1956, they built a dam on the Sirdarya above the city of Kızılordu to feed the irrigation system for cultivating rice. In arid climate, rice growing leads to the secondary soil salination, which makes it necessary to wash plantation soil with large volumes of flowing water. Drainage water goes back to the Sirdarya, carrying tons and tons of pesticides and fertilizers to the Aral Sea. The Sirdarya and Amudarya river basins are located on the territories of Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. Even within one country, it is difficult to strike compromise between energy production, agriculture, fishing industry and environmental targets. Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are facing a serious power deficit and thus try to use their water resources for this purpose as much as possible. Agriculture of Uzbekistan is based completely on irrigation. People got used to this way of life and today it's hard for them to refuse their traditional source of income. The main task of environmental organizations is to help them find alternative and environmentally friendly ways of earning their living. To tackle the transboundary challenges associated with the Aral Sea catastrophe 25 years ago, the 5 Central Asian countries established the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea, or IFAS, that even received the observer status at the UN General Assembly. On August the 24th, 2018 in Turkmenistan, the summit of the leaders of IFAS funding states took place. In his speech, Nursultan Nazarbayev, the first president of Kazakhstan, deemed the Aral Sea tragedy the most large-scale environmental disaster in humankind's history. He urged all parties to put aside their economic contradictions for the sake of the common goal, improving the environmental quality of life of the 70 million people living in the Sirdarya and Amudarya basins. More than 80 million tons of salt and different chemicals that are coming here from the irrigated fields are rising into the atmosphere and reach Western Europe and even the Himalayan summits. We are on the Shubat-Arauz Peninsula. Tomorrow, Kazakhstan open water swimmers for the first time in the history will try to cross the Aral Sea. While the festive dinner is cooking, the guys gathered around the table to talk to Bulat Kabikanovich Bekniyazov, director of the IFAS Executive Directorate. The discharge of the Sirdarya used to be 20 cubic kilometers of water per year. That of the Amudarya was about 40 cubic kilometers. Starting 2009, the Amudarya has not brought a single drop of water to the Aral Sea, although it's twice as large as the Sirdarya. The Sirdarya gives the northern Aral Sea from 1.5 to 7 cubic kilometers of water every year. It's hard for scientists to make forecasts about the future of the Aral Sea because of the uniqueness of the situation when the crisis caused by human activity and unprecedented by its scale is unfolding against the background of global climate change. During the last 50 years, the glacier area in the Tian Shan and Pamir mountains decreased by 35%. At present, we are witnessing active glacier melting. And so the time will come when they will all disappear and will not be able to feed the rivers anymore. Today we have plenty of melt water, but it still does not reach the Aral Sea whatsoever. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan had to deal with its environmental challenges on its own. It was then decided to block the Berg Strait to save at least the northern, Kazakhstan's part of the Aral Sea. In 1992 there were attempts to block it by simple means. Unfortunately, it resulted in human fatal cases. The machinery broke down also. The problem was that they decided to block the water without any serious design effort or project, without modern engineering solutions. But it's the sea after all, huge masses of water, so the dam failed. After that, somewhere in 2005, the World Bank sponsored and launched the project on regulating the riverbeds of the Sirdarya and northern Aral Sea. In 2005, with the financial assistance of the World Bank, the modern Kokoral Dam, separating the northern and southern parts of the Aral Sea, was built. The results of the project surpassed any expectations. It was estimated that the northern Aral Sea would fill up to the design target mark of 42 meters in 4 years. But in reality, it happened in 1.5 years. The area of the small Aral Sea increased by 870 square kilometers. Water mineralization fell from 23 down to 12 grams per liter. Fish production grew from 400 up to 8,000 tons. The Aral Sea is reviving. The catfish which we catch here in the Aral Sea are like that. In recent years, only flounder lived in the Aral Sea, but currently the fish fauna diversity has increased up to 20 species.
Kilogram?
25 kilograms, no less, for sure. The fishing villages along the coast have started to slowly recover. In the 90s, the Aral fishermen were leaving their owls by whole families. But as soon as the sea began coming back, they all rushed home.
The
objective of the project's second phase is to increase the northern Aral Sea by another 5 cubic kilometers. How can it be done? We are now building the second dam near the Syry-Shagana Gulf. The water now is not withdrawn close to the Kokoral Dam at the Sirdarya confluence, but closer to the town of Aralsk, through the water canal. Can you imagine the Sirdarya Delta? The Sirdarya riverbed mark at the point from where the water arrives is about 60 meters. If we expand the delta with a canal, the water will be able to reach the Syry-Shagana Gulf. The absolute mark there is about 50 meters. If we get it done, the water will come in close proximity to Aralsk, and it will again become a seaport. The water surplus goes over the dam and flows from the northern Aral Sea to the dried out bottom of the southern Aral Sea together with the fish, where it quickly evaporates. The IFAS has a plan of correcting the situation.
Our
suggestion was to create an artificial riverbed system in the southern Aral Sea below the Kokoral Dam. To dig artificial canals up to 3 meters deep and 10 to 15 meters wide. To concentrate and cover the area with a network of such canals, in order for fish to be able to live in these canals. And most importantly, to have a source of water to irrigate the vegetation planted on the dried out bed of the Aral Sea.
насаждения на осушенном дне Аральского моря.
Listening to these stories by Bulat Kabikanovic, the time has passed well after midnight. Yet it's high time to go to bed, as tomorrow they will try swimming across the Aral Sea. In the narrowest section, the distance between the Kokoral Peninsula and Cape Idale is only 7.5 kilometers. The water is warm and slightly salty. On the Aral Sea, strong winds are quite often, but the weather today is just beautiful. Putting out to sea, old fishermen usually ask the Aral Sea for good weather. It is believed that the grey-haired Aral Sea helps people with open souls and pure thoughts. Evidently, the guys came here only with good intentions, since the sea is treating them so kindly. The swimmers are spending a lot of energy. Darren Raptaev is accompanying them on the boat, feeding them every once in a while. Just a little bit more to Cape Idale. The support group is already waiting for them on the coast. They did it! In the evening, at the reserve cordon, the athletes are watching the video discussing the results of the race. Today we covered only 7 kilometers. Earlier, when the Aral Sea was still of its original size, we would have to swim for 250 to 300 kilometers. Why the open water, guys? Is it for hobby or for sport? To me, it's also an environmental type of activity. We are all united by the great love of swimming. We are amateur athletes. In the past, I did triathlon professionally, and we swam in open water. I mean seas and oceans. By such races, we want to draw public attention to various environmental issues. In this case, so as many people as possible learn about the crisis that the Aral Sea is facing. In the future, we plan to hold various environmentally focused sporting events across Kazakhstan. Next year, we want to organize another swimming race in the Aral Sea, but of a larger scale, with more participants compared to this year. It is vital to understand that the Aral Sea crisis is a small model of an apocalypse, which can take place on the planet if people do not change their habits and don't begin to treat natural resources more rationally and sustainably. The main goal of our race is to urge everybody to be more responsible. Do you think the area is good for tourism? Do you think people like you, fans of outdoor activities, will be interested in coming here? Without any doubt, the Aral Sea is interesting from the tourism point of view. There are different types of tourism. The area is great for fishing or, say, severe male getaways and off-road driving. We are saying goodbye to our athletes and heading towards Basa Kelmes Nature Reserve. Basa Kelmes Nature Reserve was established in 1929 as a wildlife reserve. Officially became a nature reserve in 1939. Its history is rather interesting, many-sided, and is closely linked with that of the Aral Sea. Whereas previously it was an island in the middle of the Aral Sea, now it's a residual hill in the midst of sands, but is still considered a cluster site of Basa Kelmes Nature Reserve. To reach the former island, we need to go about 100 kilometers across the bottom of the dried-up sea. In some places, the dry-type playa or takir, impregnated with salt, is as even as asphalt. In others, the sands have already conquered this eco-niche from the seabed. The small green islands of Saksaul and tamarisk shrubs are towering over the flat desert landscape. Their root systems help arresting the movement of sand. A tiny dragon is peeking from behind the Saksaul bush. Agamas can perfectly survive without water. The moisture in the plant's pulp is quite enough. Since 2009, we have been planting Saksaul across the dried-up bottom of the Aral Sea. Every year we plant about 1,000 bushes. Tamarisk or heath is spreading on its own. It was completely calm in the morning, yet by midday the strong wind arose and the horizon got overcast with white haze. The fine bitterish dust is even getting inside the airtight vehicle cabin. I'm not sure if you will be able to see it on the screen. We have just entered a dust and salt storm. Visibility is only about 100 meters. Fine salty sand is creaking on our teeth, getting under the clouds, into our food stocks and equipment. We are in Kaderi natural boundary. When the sea left on its bottom about 40 kilometers away from Basa Kelmes Island, the fishermen found the remains of an ancient settlement with dozens of ceramic and color-glazed brick elements scattered around. This stone millstone was probably used for grinding grain. Does it mean that the settlement's ancient residents cultivated grain crops? The guys have found a fragment of a round copper object. What is it? A Karakani dirham or a pocket mirror? The Karakhanid state minted copper dirhams with the images of animals. The legend says that during Genghis Khan's invasion, the last Khwarezm Shah Muhammad II fled to one of the islands in the Aral Sea with a huge caravan of camels loaded with treasure. The settlements on the bottom of the Aral Sea became a sensation not so much among archaeologists but hydrologists, because it proved that the sea had dried up and recovered at least once before. And this fact of course gives hope that this sea will revive again. Some scientists allege that the drying up of the Aral Sea in the second half of the 14th century was due to the so-called Small Ice Age. Back then, the average temperature in Eurasia fell by 4 degrees, and that caused the largest environmental disaster of the time. Millions of people died of hunger in Europe because of poor harvest. In the Central Asian mountains, the temperature fall led to reduced glacier melting and water inflow into the Sirdarya and Amu Darya rivers. We are entering the nature reserve's limits. The local landscape is so different. Black sucksole thickets stretch out for tens of kilometers around. Basa Kelmes means going and never coming back, and there are several versions of the name's origin. One of them says that the inhabitants of one of the local owls decided to survive the hard times on the island. They went there in winter over the ice together with their cattle and belongings, but in summer, when all meltwater sources had dried up, they died of thirst. According to another, the coastal waters around the island were abundant of fish, but were also famous for severe storms. Some fishermen pursuing a good catch would risk going to water in bad weather and quite often would not return. Before the revolution, nobody lived on the island permanently, but the fishermen built several lodges, a warehouse and an ice cellar for storing fish. Apparently, the heroes of the novel 41st by Boris Lavrenyov have found themselves in one of such fishing huts. They found happiness on this desert island, but the civil war overtook them even here. The northern coast of the island was flat with sandy beaches. The southwest island end drops into the sea with steep cliffs. For many years, this old barge that had sunk a long time ago near the Cape of Butakov was the favorite swimming place for the reserve staff. In 1929, Basa Kelmes Reproduction and Hunting Farm was established. They built lodges and collectors for melt and rainwater. Game managers delivered 9 goitered gazelles and 6 saigars, as well as gophers, hares, partridges and semirecha pheasants to the island. Unlike goitered gazelles, the saiga had previously lived on the island but were almost completely destroyed by humans. The last female was killed in 1922. In 1939, on the premises of the hunting farm, they created a nature reserve. Later, the island animal population was supplemented with 9 kulans. By the late 70s, when the Aral Sea started to face serious water deficit, about 2,000 gazelles and 350 kulans were living on the island. The saiga population was fluctuating due to natural factors, falling down to 200 animals and increasing up to 1,500 heads. The reserve became a unique research lab under the open sky, as it allowed studying the island's fauna and flora isolated from the continent for hundreds and hundreds of years, as well as conducting reintroduction experiments with rare animals. Hundreds of nature experts who later became prominent scientists have gone through the research school of the reserve. Bringing the animal species that were previously destroyed to their former wild habitats is currently called rewilding and is one of the key areas of conservation efforts. Without false modesty, we can say that the scientists working at Basa Kelmes Nature Reserve had made a significant contribution to its development. We are driving up to the main building of the reserve's administration. Before the retreat of the sea, these houses were occupied by the reserve staff all year round. In the 70s, they drilled a well in Bassa Kelmes. It was not an easy task, as it turned out that the first accessible aquifer was located 700 meters below the ground surface. For several years, they pumped the water onto the surface, but eventually the well got blocked with silt. We set up our camp near an abandoned ship. In peacetime, this former landing barge was used for freight transportation. When the sea left, one captain continued to look after the ship because he believed that the time would come when his son and he would once again put out to sea. One day he got sick and was hospitalized, but his son sold the ship as scrap metal. When the old man was dying, he didn't even look his son in the eye. During the last couple of years, I kept on hearing that the ships in our section of the Aral Sea have practically disappeared, as people cut them up and sold for scrap metal. This time we have looked for it for a long time and have probably found the last ship on the Kazakhstan side. We want it to be listed as a historical site, as the last witness of the Aral Sea catastrophe. Even though the Aral Sea has dried up, we have to keep the memory of it forever. That's why we should preserve these ships as long as possible to tell the people around the world about the tragedy of the Aral Sea and visually demonstrate the history of the sea. The cluster site of Kaska-Kulan Nature Reserve is our next destination point. Like Bassa Kelmes, once upon a time it was an island in the middle of the Aral Sea, but now it's just a part of its eastern coast. Kulans and other animals like Kaska-Kulan better than Bassa Kelmes because it has 3 artesian wells. In 1953, they brought several kulans to Bassa Kelmes from Turkmenistan Wildlife Reserve. They quickly reproduced, and already in the 80s, the kulans were brought to other protected areas, for example, Altyn-Emel. In 1997, when the sea has dried up completely, the remaining kulans were relocated to Kaska-Kulan, about 70 kilometers from here. There are 3 wells there. Now their population has reached 570 animals. It's hard to locate kulans in the middle of the huge desert. The members of the Nomad Explorer team got really lucky to see 120 animals at once. Of course, we did not survey all their potential habitats, but it was enough to understand the scale of the tragedy that the Aral kulans had gone through. Now they have a chance of occupying all the suitable areas of the recovered northern Aral Sea, and our task is to help them in doing so. If people leave a little bit of land for kulans and successfully cope with poachers, the kulan population will grow. There is absolutely no doubt about it. During our journey, we encountered only 5 goitered gazelles, which is not many. Yet, if the 9 gazelles reintroduced to Bassa Kelmes Nature Reserve were able to build their population up to 2,000 animals, there is hope that in the near future the beautiful white-tailed gazelles will become a common decoration of the Aral Sea desert landscapes. The Aral Sea crisis concerns the whole world. Thousands of scientific works have been written and hundreds of movies were filmed about it. Our journey was only a couple of days, and of course it wasn't enough to penetrate deeply into the topic. Yet the impressions of our short journey make us confident that there will be time when the Aral Sea will revive.